Not long ago, General Motors was still considered the last remaining symbol standing amidst the ashes of Motor City. But now the latest figures show that giant is cracking. Nearly $2 billion USD evaporated just in the electric vehicle sector. Thousands of workers were laid off. Many production lines in the US are temporarily shut down, while GM's factory in China is expanding production. After all, who is really benefiting from this EV revolution? Remember, in 2009, the US government bailed out GM with billions of dollars of taxpayers' money. So why are the numbers red hot again 15 years later? Who decided to bet GM's future on the EV game? And why are things collapsing so quickly? Some people say it was a strategic mistake. Others believe this is a story that has never been told, about the deals, pressures, and trade-offs between Washington, Wall Street, and Detroit. In today's video, we'll reopen the doors that have been closed for a decade to uncover the secrets behind the fall of General Motors. From dark boardrooms to abandoned assembly lines where the American dream was once built and is now slowly being dismantled piece by piece. To understand why General Motors is drowning in billions of dollars in losses from electric vehicles, we must go back to the beginning, a time when GM was not just a company, but the very definition of America. In 1908, a successful carriage salesman named William Durant founded General Motors with a bold vision. No one should drive just one car their whole life. He doesn't want to sell cars, he wants to sell the dream of mobility. In just a few years, GM acquired Cadillac, Buick, Oldsmobile, and then Chevrolet, each brand a piece of the American dream. Imagine, in the mid-1950s, 1 out of every 2 working Americans drove a GM vehicle. Over 600,000 employees, 50% domestic market share, and revenue sufficient to support an entire state. GM didn't just produce cars, they created the American middle class, where workers had their own homes, televisions, and the first Chevrolet parked in front of their yards. If America were a body, Detroit would be its heart, and GM its heartbeat. The sound of metal stamping machines echoed throughout the city, each hammer blow a beat of national pride. This is not just an industrial center, but also a sanctuary of Made in America faith. When the world was still covered in ashes after World War II, Detroit shone like a new Rome of the automotive industry. The gleaming chrome Cadillacs were a statement of the prosperous era. The GM ad says, "You can tell it's a Chevy by the way it looks and by the way you feel." And that's right. Americans don't just drive GM cars, they drive their pride. But like all empires, the gold always hides silver cracks. When GM grew too quickly, they also became as slow as the large sedans they produced. The leaders began to believe that size was immortal. They were intoxicated by profits, forgot about technology, and ignored the changes happening outside. The reports are more beautiful than every single screw. Dividends for shareholders are higher than R&D investment. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, Toyota, Honda, and Nissan are quietly building a philosophy of quality over quantity. American customers are starting to pay attention to small, fuel-efficient, and durable cars. But GM stuck with the massive V8 engine because Americans love power. How can an empire collapse when everything seems perfect? Was it fate or the result of decisions that no one dared to speak of? In the next part, you will see how pride turns into a disease, and Detroit, from the heart of America, began to stop beating. After 3 decades of dominance, General Motors entered the 1980s with a full war chest and almost arrogant confidence. But sometimes, success itself can be a blinding drug. When the world began talking about automation, GM decided to get ahead of the curve. In 1981, CEO Roger Smith spent over $40 billion on his ambition to transform GM into the company of the future. It was a huge investment, enough to buy the entire Toyota company at that time. The robots were brought onto the production line, but instead of optimizing productivity, they created an era of chaos. Faulty assembly lines, malfunctioning vehicles, and declining output. Workers, the soul of Detroit, were laid off en masse. Flint was once the heart of GM. But in 1986, tens of thousands of people were laid off in just a few months. The city is gradually losing its essence, and so is trust. GM believes robots can replace workers, but they forget that machines cannot assemble loyalty. The quality of the vehicle has decreased and the cost has increased. Buick and Oldsmobile models, once iconic, are now criticized for being too similar, lacking personality, and repeating the same mistakes. In just 5 years, GM's market share dropped from 46% to 35%. Each loyal customer began to leave, and they never returned. GM was like a giant ship confidently hurtling forward without realizing water was pouring in from below. Michael Moore's documentary, Roger and Me, captured that moment. Families losing their jobs, empty neighborhoods, closed schools. No more work whistles, just the sound of the wind whistling through the Flint factory doors. GM didn't fail because they ran out of money, but because they forgot the reason for their existence. They were once the pride of America, but now they have become a symbol of corporate indifference, an empire of steel, yet lacking a heart. Could this be the first turning point that caused GM to lose its soul? When businesses view people as a burden, can they still be businesses of the future? Success blinded them, and as the halo faded, they had no idea. That was just the first fall. After the crisis of the early 1980s, General Motors remained strong. And in the 1990s, they returned to what America loves most: power. The U.S. economy is recovering. Gas is cheap. The consumer market is booming. GM saw an opportunity and re-entered the SUV, truck, and pickup truck market. Chevrolet Tahoe, Suburban, GMC Sierra. Each vehicle weighing nearly 3 tons of steel became a symbol of power. GM stock climbed to a peak of $90 with record profits. The commercials are filled with images of strong, indomitable American men, like a rock. But behind that brilliance, an old disease is still spreading. Revenue increased, but quality decreased, and innovation disappeared. GM at this point was like a giant, muscular athlete, beautiful on the court, but inside, osteoporosis had begun to set in. Instead of investing in technology, GM poured billions of dollars into dividends and stock buybacks to please Wall Street. Engineers warn, the market is changing. Green energy, technology, software. But in the boardroom, the answer was, pickup trucks are still selling well. Why change? When Toyota developed the Prius, the first hybrid model, GM even mocked the idea of electric cars. They once had a golden opportunity with EVs, but they themselves destroyed the project because it wasn't immediately profitable. In just 10 years, the amount GM spent on R&D decreased by over 30%, while shareholder dividends doubled. GM became the classic example of the blind success effect. They didn't realize the market was shifting. I don't believe technology can change business models. Not willing to learn from your own mistakes. Giant SUVs brought in short-term profits but sowed the seeds for the oil crisis and subsequent collapse. GM couldn't see the future because they were too busy looking in the rearview mirror. Is it possible that every business has its own limits to success when money starts to make them deaf to warnings? When they thought they were immortal, the storm began to form. And this time, it's not just a financial crisis, but the collapse of an entire empire. November 2008, General Motors, the empire that once supported 600,000 Americans, stood on the brink of bankruptcy. From national pride, they became symbols of greed, mistakes, and inevitable downfall. At the beginning of the 21st century, GM was the king of trucks, but behind that solid exterior was a decaying body. The company's labor, pension, and healthcare costs exceeded $0 billion, nearly double NASA's budget at the time. Giant SUVs helped GM survive in the short term, but they also made them dependent on oil prices. When gas prices exceeded $4 per gallon, Americans abandoned large vehicles and switched to Toyotas and Hondas. Sales plummeted, while GM still bore the huge costs of hundreds of thousands of employees and factories. In 2008 alone, GM lost over $30 billion, enough money to buy all of Tesla 5 times over. A 100-year-old company is being strangled not by competitors, but by the very model that made its name. In December 2008, CEO Rick Wagoner flew to Washington to seek a bailout. But instead of eliciting sympathy, the image of GM's leadership flying in private jets angered the public. They came to ask for money from the people using the people's own tax money. Despite public pressure, the U.S. government still released $50 billion in aid because if GM collapsed, over 1 million jobs would be lost. But Americans didn't see it as a rescue, but as a reward for failure. Like a critically ill patient, GM was given adrenaline, but the underlying illness remained unchanged. Many people think GM has been revived after the bailout, but in the shadows of the contracts, another reality unfolded. GM began closing 13 plants, laying off 2,500 people, and eliminating iconic brands: Pontiac, Saturn, Hummer. Rick Wagoner left the CEO position with a multi-million-dollar retirement package. And Flint, Michigan, the home of GM, fell into decline. Shops, schools, and hospitals closed one after another. An empire built on the sweat of workers is now being saved by their blood. In name, the American people saved GM. But according to financial documents, the majority of GM's international debt is borne by its foreign partners. Among them, the SAIC Shanghai Automotive Joint Venture stands out, where GM transferred technology in exchange for capital. Since 2009, small cars, hybrid engines, and fuel-saving technologies have begun to be developed. Not in Detroit, but in Shanghai. When America thought it was saving GM, in reality, GM was selling its future abroad. Flint became a ghost town, Detroit was deeply in debt, and tens of thousands of homes were abandoned. From Motor City, Detroit transformed into a symbol of post-industrial America. It wasn't just the day GM ended. That was the day Detroit lost its heartbeat, and America lost faith that made in the USA still meant something. If $50 billion can save an empire, but not save trust, is it worth it? And when businesses become a burden on the people, who is the one who truly pays the price? The 2008 crisis didn't end when GM was bailed out. It only opens a new chapter, where Detroit is gradually being replaced and another power is preparing to enter: China. After the 2008 crash, GM had only two options: sell assets or sell its soul. The US government bailed them out with $50 billion, but that amount was only enough to keep the machine running within US borders. The branches in Asia, especially South Korea and India, are on the brink of bankruptcy. In the darkness of the crisis, GM turned to SAIC, Shanghai Automotive Industry Corporation, a rising state-owned enterprise in China. A seemingly small deal, GM sells 1% of its stake in Shanghai GM in exchange for a $400 million loan, enough to keep GM Korea afloat. But behind that number lies a ghost deal. SAIC has the right to control capital flow, data, and production decisions. With just 1%, SAIC gained a foothold in American technology. Previously, GM always protected its technology like national treasures, from automatic transmissions and hybrid engines to its first electric vehicle platform. But in memos after 2009, GM agreed to share all R&D data with its Chinese partner in exchange for market access. Shortly after, GM and SAIC established a joint research center in Shanghai, where Chinese and American engineers jointly developed new generations of hybrid and EV vehicles. It sounds equal, but in reality, control lies with the partner. All technologies developed from this joint venture are patented in China first, and then in the United States. GM thinks it's teaching its partner how to drive, but when they realize, the steering wheel was no longer in their hands. In just 5 years, SAIC expanded production to over 11 factories and thousands of dealerships across China. While Detroit is cutting staff, the SAIC GM plant is working overtime to serve the domestic market. From 2010 to 2020, 70% of GM vehicles globally were produced outside the United States, with the majority in China. GM is gradually becoming a Chinese company producing American cars for Americans. Vehicles like the Buick Envision, Cadillac CT6, and Chevrolet Sail are all manufactured in China and labeled as American design. American consumers thought they were driving a national icon, but in reality, it was the product of a global joint venture whose ownership they were completely unaware of. The GM-SAIC agreement was hailed as a miracle of revival, but for many experts, it's a reckless gamble, because GM gave away not only technology, but also the soul of America, the very thing that once set them apart from all their competitors. The American taxpayers saved GM, so it could become China Motors. Is survival worth it if it means sacrificing one's identity? And in the era of globalization, do the boundaries between saving and selling still exist? From Detroit to Shanghai, GM's journey hasn't stopped, because now they are betting everything on the future: electric vehicles. General Motors once called electric cars the future, But now that very future is consuming them. After selling its soul to the Chinese market, GM is regaining confidence in electric vehicle technology. They declared, "We will become America's #1 electric vehicle company." That ambition is accompanied by a strategy called Ultium, a common battery and chassis platform for the entire future EV lineup. GM is spending over $35 billion on this plan, opening a series of battery plants in the US and partnering with LG Energy. The models are promoted as symbols of rebirth: Chevy Bolt, an electric car for everyone; Hummer EV, America's new power; Cadillac Lyriq, an icon of electrified luxury. But behind the shiny veneer lies a painful paradox. The technology isn't ready, but GM can't wait any longer. Analysts are calling Ultium the biggest money-burning gamble in GM's history. Battery production costs increased by 40%. Supply chains were disrupted, and the launch of many vehicle models was repeatedly delayed. The Chevy Bolt, initially praised, was recalled for over 140,000 units due to the risk of battery defects. Hummer EV sales only reached a few thousand vehicles, a figure far too small compared to expectations for a strategic flagship. Dealers complain, components are scarce, and delivery times are up to a year long. Result: GM lost over $4.5 billion in 2023 in the EV segment alone. Since Ultium's launch, estimated total losses have exceeded $6 billion, equivalent to the cost of operating Michigan's entire state hospital system for a year. GM plunged into the future like a giant ship in the fog, without radar, without a map, relying only on the memories of the past. While Tesla, BYD, and Rivian are developing a complete closed-loop EV ecosystem, GM still maintains a traditional automaker mindset, separating design, manufacturing, and software, rely on external suppliers, and especially still measuring effectiveness based on quarterly profits instead of a long-term vision. GM didn't lose because of technology. They lost because of how they viewed technology. Experts call it corporate genetic error, when a company that once dominated the oil and gas industry tries to enter the software world but still thinks in engine language. Many Americans don't believe GM can make a comeback. Comments on the forums are filled with sarcasm. Too much electrification, too little vision. They produce garbage at a premium price. GM's electric vehicles are expensive, lack innovation, and most importantly, lack emotion. What once made Americans choose Chevrolet or Cadillac is no longer present. All that's left are heavy, expensive, and soulless models. Is General Motors investing in the future or buying a round-trip ticket back to the past? And when the dream of electrification becomes a burden, will they have the strength to survive in the electric vehicle era? And as they looked ahead, they didn't realize that the past was slowly coming back to collect its debts. General Motors, a name once synonymous with American strength, innovation, and pride, now echoes only as a relic of a bygone era. They used to teach the world how to dream about the future, but then they were the first to shatter that dream. GM didn't collapse just because of debt or technology. They collapsed because they forgot why they were born. From cars for everyone, they made themselves a brand for shareholders. When the goal is no longer to create something better, but rather better than last quarter, a company begins to lose its way from within. No empire collapses in a day. They break the moment they stop listening, stop caring, and stop building for people. Today, GM still exists, but it's just a giant shell with a weak heartbeat. The production lines are still running, but that sound is no longer the music of hope. It's the machinery of an industrial graveyard. The GM headquarters building still stands tall in the heart of Detroit, but its reflective glass windows mirror the image of a city that has lost its way. People tell stories about their ancestors working for GM. Now their descendants drive imported cars. Detroit was once the Rome of the automotive industry. Now it's just the ruins of an empire that burned itself out in its own light. From GM, the world learned a bitter lesson. No brand is so big that it cannot fail. And sometimes the real collapse isn't when the company goes bankrupt, but when people stop believing in it. Are we, with technology, artificial intelligence, and new dreams, repeating GM's path? When success makes us forget the original reason, what will be left? Money or ashes? General Motors is not just the story of a company, but it's an elegy for an era that believed metal could create trust. The story of General Motors is not just a wake-up call for the automotive industry. It's a mirror reflecting for all empires, from businesses to nations, that when pride exceeds vision, collapse is only a matter of time. From Detroit to Shanghai, from the first Cadillac to electric vehicles losing billions of dollars, GM has lost more than just profits. They've lost the soul of American industry. Perhaps the question is no longer, will GM survive? But rather, can we learn anything from them? What do you think? Is GM on the cusp of an electrochemical rebirth? Or is this the final eulogy for the American auto industry? Please leave your thoughts below, as this very debate will determine how we view the future of global industry. If you enjoy economic, historical, and investigative perspectives like this, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episodes, where we continue to dissect seemingly immortal empires. All content in the video is analytical, educational, and commentary based on public data, and does not represent or attack any organization, individual, or country. Our goal is to explore the business lessons and human values behind every rise and fall. And